I'm muted. Welcome everyone to today's webinar, the 3 R's of Pro Bono Management. This webinar is sponsored by the ABA Commission on Immigration and the Center for Pro Bono. This is part 3 of our Pro Bono Best Practices series. My name is Marissa Levette. I am the Assistant Staff Counsel with the ABA Center for Pro Bono. And just a few housekeeping items before we start. Please remember if you have questions during the webinar to go ahead and put those in the Q&A, and we will answer those throughout the program, and we will also try to leave some time at the end of the webinar for questions. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to my panelists to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their programs and positions. And I'm going to start with Amy.
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you to the ABA Center for Pro Bono and the ABA Commission for Immigration for including me. So I am not Miguel Martinez. My colleague is unfortunately ill, so I'm stepping in today. But I'm here from One Justice. We're a California legal aid support center. And we look to strengthen and help build capacity with the legal aid sector. And one of the ways, obviously, in which to do that is incorporating volunteers. And we do that in a number of different ways, consulting and also partnering. One of the ways, and what I'll be talking about maybe more specifically when it comes to volunteer management, is that we typically do this with limited scope legal clinics. And so those are the types of volunteers in which we engage with. So Marissa, do you want to?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and turn it over. Yeah, I'll go ahead and Angela, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Angela Bliachi Syndronis. I'm the director of the Pro Bono program at Americans for Immigrant Justice. We're a nonprofit law firm headquartered in Miami, Florida. Our Pro Bono program actually started as a result of a need, as most Pro Bono programs start off, right? So I was working in our children's program, and we had several children who were at risk of aging out of Office of Refugee Resettlement custody and being moved to adult immigration detention under the Department of Homeland Security. I started working with pro bono attorneys in assisting with filing petitions for dependency in cases where that was applicable based on the facts. And from there, we started to realize that there's a lot of phenomenal people who want to give back, want to help, and we had a need, right? So since then, we launched our pro bono program, and I've had the opportunity to work with tons of pro bono partners on all kinds of different cases. Thank you so much to the ABA for having me.
All right, and Jeff, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Okay, hi everyone. This is Jeff Brown. I'm the pro bono program manager at the State Bar of Wisconsin. We're a mandatory / integrated bar here. We have about 16,000 active members, and my role here is to basically do what we're talking about today, to do these 3 R's for pro bono for Wisconsin lawyers. So I work a lot with our legal aid programs, local bar associations, individual law firms, and lawyers to find ways for them to volunteer, to recruit volunteers, setting up new programs, providing services and benefits and consultations to programs and individuals around pro bono, with the goal of basically helping supplement the efforts of our staff lawyers and our staff legal aid offices with as many volunteers as we can find for as many different types of practice issues that clients might experience. So I've been doing this for 18 years here at the bar, and I was a volunteer in private practice before that.
All right, thanks everyone. So let's get started with our first topic, which is recruitment. So what are some of the best methods that you all have found to recruit volunteers? And I'm going to go ahead and start with Jeff on this question.
Okay, so we use a variety of means. You know, we have the luxury, I guess, or the of being a bar association. So for recruitment, we have access to our members, obviously. So we can use all the tools that a bar association has to reach out to its members to recruit. Once we have identified a need and have set up a program either on our own or with other partners, or if someone comes to us with a program or an idea, we can help reach out to our members through our website, through our social media, through our electronic newsletters, our magazine. We can use all of those tools, and we can do it in an integrated way to reach them. We also have a Paladin pro bono portal set up for Wisconsin. So we try to make it easy. The idea for my entire tenure here has been to reduce friction, reduce points of friction for recruitment. So basically take away anything that someone says might be a barrier to work and find a way to reduce that. So if people say that they can't find opportunities that fit their interests, we try very hard to keep a broad variety of opportunities in our statewide pro bono portal, which allows them to, with basically a couple of clicks, to find pro bono opportunities in their area of interest and respond to them. So those are some of the things that we do.
I'm going to pass that to Angela now to talk about some of your approaches, specifically coming from the immigration standpoint.
Sure. So I think we've heard this time and time again, right? But you have to know your audience, right? The recruitment process really is a strategic process. So anytime I'm looking to recruit pro bono partners, I'm thinking about who the partners are who I'm going to be reaching out to. Am I going to be reaching out to firms? Is it going to be a company? Is it going to be an individual? You know, I have a mix actually of pro bono partners who I've worked with. And, you know, there's different cases and situations where a different partner may be the best fit for the case. Another part of that is knowing what your messaging is going to be as far as, you know, what the need is, what the pro bono need is, but also, you know, showing what volunteers are going to get out of working with your organization and taking on pro bono work with your organization, right? So can I highlight any skills that attorneys are going to be able to build? You know, is this an opportunity to make an impact in a developing or changing area of the law? Those sorts of incentives, I think, are really important in your recruitment strategy, right? And with that, kind of keeping in mind that once you figure out, am I reaching out to a firm? Am I reaching out to a company? Is it an individual? On the firm side, for example, you have to really figure out how that firm runs their pro bono practice, right? So do they have a more centralized model? Is there potentially a pro bono partner who's part of a pro bono committee overall in the firm? Do they have a pro bono counsel, someone whose direct focus is on pro bono matters? Or is it more open to where attorneys can, you know, reach out internally to someone higher up and tell them, I want to take on this pro bono matter that's important to me? All of that is important. I will say in any sort of recruitment, it's always kind of a must to identify who's the higher up that's going to be involved.
Amy, what are some ways that One Justice and some of your programs that you focus on recruitment and that you structure your recruitment of attorneys?
Yeah, I mean, I have to echo, I think, what Angela was saying about knowing your audience, and also knowing what, you know, being really transparent and clear about who it is and what it is that they will be doing. So, you know, not just the skills building, but, you know, being clear. I think with our, a lot of, like I said, we partner with other organizations on these collaborative limited scope legal clinics. Typically, they don't require substantive expertise. Sometimes they do. And so just being really clear about what is required and what is not required, and what they, you know, what opportunity could be open to. You know, similarly, if we're talking with large law firms, which typically have a pro bono coordinator, you know, identifying like, who does the communication go through, who should be included, and trying to answer those questions up front about how many spaces are available, who can participate, and what all of the expectations are up front with the volunteers, I think is really helpful with identifying the right type of volunteer. With a lot of our limited scope clinics, it is going through pro bono contacts. So either at a law, so oftentimes we work with law students, or sometimes like paralegal organizations. So identifying who's the coordinator and communicating directly through them, and then they can disseminate it. We also work a lot with individuals, just come to us sometimes, or through other organizations. And so we'll communicate individually with them. And I have to say, I think we'll talk about this later, but having repeat volunteers is really critical, I think, to ensuring really productive pro bono experience.
I just want to mention one other thing, and this is kind of the networking approach that it's related to what my other panelists have talked about, is that just having someone who can vouch for you and the value that your program brings to clients is so important. So that's part of what, knowing your audience and finding the right person at the firm who can magnify your outreach effort is really, really helpful. I can think of one project that we're working on now where we were able to recruit quite a few volunteers directly, but we recruited even more by using a well-connected lawyer to do some direct outreach on our behalf as well. So that really magnified what we were able to do. We could send out a lot of emails, but it meant a lot more when they got that personal outreach from this attorney saying, hey, this is a good one, you should volunteer.
What are some ways that you all craft your recruitment to specific needs and specific projects that you have? And I'm kind of throwing this out there to anybody, so I don't know, Jeff, you're unmuted. Do you want to start out?
Sure. I was just before this program started, I was just responding to the head of our senior lawyers division because we'd done some targeted outreach to their members, and he wanted to know what the results were. So we have an effort to help Afghan asylees with their asylum petitions or applications. So we did some targeted outreach to some of the senior lawyers, hoping and correctly that more of them might be inclined to respond because they're at a time in their career where they have more time to devote to something like this, and it has a fairly discrete time frame. So that kind of targeted approach to specific groups has worked well for us.
Angela or Amy, do you have anything to follow up on that with how you've crafted some of your recruitment strategies to specific needs and projects?
Yeah, I think it's starting from the very, very beginning when you're connecting with a pro bono partner, right? So anytime I'm trying to make that connect, I set up a call. I want to know exactly what it is that they're interested in, what they've done in the past, and how I can kind of share with them opportunities that I have or may have in the future that are going to match up with those, right? I think that in doing that as well, it's not that it's bad to send out, large, we need your help messages. I have done that in the past because we need people's help and we want to get it out there big picture. But I do tend to also really think about kind of who my network of pro bono attorneys are and who would be the right person for me to reach out to on a specific opportunity based on that initial conversation that I had when I connected with that pro bono partner on what, what their interests are, what projects they've worked on in the past. Also, I think in the pro bono world, we don't always like to think about things in the money context, right? That's not initially the first thing on our mind, but I think it's something that plays a really large role in what kind of pro bono work pro bono partners can take on. So that also I think is a category I take into account when I'm crafting what my recruitment is going to be for specific needs.
So the last 3 years, or maybe not 3 years, but I guess 2.5 years, has sort of changed the nature of some of the pro bono work and some of the pro bono recruitment strategies. How has the changing nature of pro bono over the last 2.5 years changed some of your recruitment strategies? I guess I'll start with, Angela or Amy, either you have anything that you've done differently?
So one thing I think is that as far as remote work goes, that has made it to where I have a broader network of potential pro bono partners. I think that's been excellent. But first and foremost, you know, you have to be honest with pro bono partners. And I say that in the context of, I love the fact that I've been able to get pro bono partners who I, normally in a pre-COVID world would not have been able to get their help from. But also I'm aware of the fact that a lot of courts, for example, are starting to go back to in-person hearings, things of that nature. So when I, connect with a pro bono partner and talk about remote opportunities, I let them know also that, hey, this is the current state of things now. There could be a potential in the future where that'll change, where there might be a required in-court appearance. Is that something that your firm would be able to work out as far as travel and costs associated with that? So I think part of that relationship building part is getting your pro bono partners to trust you and know that what you're telling them is the honest truth. And in some situations, I can't really foresee what the future is going to be,
Well, I'll just jump in and say that, we, like everyone, we really had to focus on the virtual volunteering at the start of the pandemic. When everything shut down, staff, legal offices, a lot of courts, and everything moved to virtual, all of our pitches had to move to virtual, and most of the in-person efforts shut down at least for 6 months or more. But as things have slowly changed and people's comfort levels with in-person activities have risen, we've been having more, still not the same volume of programs in person, but there's been more remote volunteering, which has allowed more people in rural areas in particular that didn't have in-person opportunities to start with. They now have some access to volunteers they didn't have before. We have some additional in-person clinics that have started up as people recognize the need. We've done some special things. Even during the height of the Delta wave, we were able to put on an in-person expungement and pardon clinic in one particular area of the state. So that went well. We didn't have difficulty finding volunteers. We just had to reassure people that this was going to be a big enough space. Masks would be required, things like that. Talking about firms and making in-person appearances, as most courts are doing at least hybrid now, allowing more remote appearances, I think the firms that were reluctant or that prohibited their attorneys from making in-person appearances on pro bono cases have relaxed that now, so they're more comfortable with that now. So I don't see that as being as much of a barrier, but individual lawyers may have different risk tolerance. So you just, like she said, you have to be clear about what could happen so that they understand that they may have to travel, they may have to go into a hearing at some point.
Yeah, I mean, I think I want to echo what everyone has shared so far. I agree so much that it definitely opened up the opportunities, and we didn't have sort of the geographic constraints, particularly, we're a California support center. I'm based in Los Angeles. The great deal of pro bonos often are in, more urban areas like San Francisco, the San Francisco Bay Area, Los Angeles, and the needs in more far-reaching or even not so far-reaching, but because of traffic, areas had limited the pro bono participation. So it was great to open up the possibility of people participating. I think there's also just the challenge though of relationship developing and vetting. There's nothing quite like an in-person connection, both, on the, just like on the one-on-one, when we're talking to volunteers and trying to get a better sense of what they're looking for and what qualifications they have. But also just, I think, from the experience itself, there's a lot of obviously like logistical challenges. The shift to remote clinics was a significant one for us, as was everyone. And I think it is definitely the changing nature as things shift back. I think there's even more complications because people are really, I think as Jeff said, people are in really different places, and it's hard to tell like what people's comfort level is and what the various interests and needs are. So just sort of navigating, trying to be as transparent as possible. And also as just like things continually change, just keeping this mindset of contingency planning and, trying to keep people up to date as much as possible, but just letting them know, like, this is our plans for now. Let's, continue really open communication, I think is key.
We had a question come in that I'm going to just go ahead and jump in with, but this person asked, it seems like all three of the panelists mainly use pro bono attorneys for one-off smaller pro bono cases. Does anyone have experience working with pro bono firms on larger class action or impact litigation? Have any of you done any projects like that?
We work with pro bono attorneys for like federal litigation cases. We normally put a co-counseling agreement in place. So we do get involved with that. I know a lot of firms have been really active, for example, recently in joining with, nonprofit partners for the family separation litigation, as far as FTCA claims go. So yes, absolutely. I think there's different kinds of pro bono opportunities. I will say, most of the focus I've typically done has been on, direct representation of individual clients. But absolutely, and I think that a lot of law firms have responded very well to kind of these bigger scale federal, immigration cases. We're also, just to add, actually, now that I think about it, it's something where they can transfer skills, for big firm litigators. FTCA, for example, it's things that they're comfortable with and know. So that's actually been really efficient as far as collaborating with us for co-counseling.
Yeah, you do have to have the resources to work with a larger firm on these kinds of projects. So you need someone who's available to sort of troubleshoot. They'll bring a lot of firepower to the case. And I'm speaking from my past life, not my current work with the bar, but my past life in private practice. Big firms or larger firms or firms that like impact litigation, they're willing to devote the lawyer resources to it. But they're also going to need some help with client relations, maybe translation, things like that, logistics that they may not normally deal with in their normal practice.
Another thought that comes to mind also is like the discovery process can be really, really work and resource intensive. And I found that large firms have been really, really great to collaborate with, as far as them taking the lead on the discovery process.
So moving on to our next topic of, you have some attorneys recruited now and you have them starting to volunteer for you. How do you keep your attorneys and how do you retain them? So first off, what are some of the supports that pro bono attorneys need from you as a program? I'm going to start with Angela on this one. Oops. I think, Angela, are you frozen? Okay, I'm going to start with Jeff. You go ahead.
Okay, I'll jump in here. So supporting volunteers is key to retaining them. And from our perspective, some of the early things that we did as part of my kind of reducing friction program here, things like expense reimbursement, insurance for those who don't have it, So if you're dealing with someone who's retired or works in-house, they may not have insurance. Those are important things. We have a fund that our bar association provides to reimburse lawyers for out-of-pocket expenses on pro bono cases. So if we had one lawyer who took on a consumer case against a bunch of big lenders, and she burned through toner cartridges and paper like, there was nothing. They were nothing. So we paid for thousands of dollars of that sort of stuff. But it also covers, travel to asylum hearings in Chicago, veterans appeals, Federal Court of Appeals in DC, and all sorts of other things locally, experts, fees, things like that. The lawyers are willing to donate their time, and just being willing to cover the things that they weren't expecting to cover in the process. Those are some of the things that we've put in place as supports, as well as trying to link them up with things like mentors.
I believe I cut out before, so my apologies to everyone. Can you hear me okay now? Wonderful. So I was just going to say, first and foremost, I think it's extremely important for pro bono partners to know who their point of contact is, right? So, at least as it pertains to cases that I place, I directly serve as their point of contact, and I work very closely on the cases with pro bono partners. I want them to know that if a question comes up along the process, they know that they can reach out to me and send me a message and say, hey, this issue came up. I don't know, what to do, how to proceed. And I think with that also, it brings up the importance of organizations taking into account that you really should invest in having a pro bono lead within your organization. Somebody who, wakes up every day and says, this is my job to manage and handle pro bono, but someone who also has the substantive knowledge, I think is really helpful. So, I was, prior to my role as a pro bono director for many years, I was doing direct representation of these cases. So I know how to do them. I know the substance. And in turn, attorneys know that they can, at least have somebody who has the experience with it, somebody who's going to review it, be able to provide, good input. As much as I can, I like to create supportive materials in-house that, samples, things that they're going to be able to refer to, but also taking advantage of materials that partners have put together. So I definitely want to make a plug to the ABA Children's Immigration Law Academy, CILA. They put together a wonderful pro bono guide for pro bono attorneys taking on immigration cases. And that's been really helpful to me because I can share that with my pro bono partners. And it's something that I don't need to be creating in-house and putting time towards putting together. So yeah, I think not only creating resources in-house, but looking at what opportunities exist from outside partnering organizations.
And there was a question about the mentoring I mentioned. So since we're a bar association, not a law firm, we don't have the on-staff expertise that the others would have to provide. So we basically connect people with lawyers who I know who practice in that area. And as someone who took his first bankruptcy pro bono case at the start of the pandemic, not necessarily knowing there was going to be a pandemic, I was very grateful for that. So I actually reached out to a lawyer who partners with one of our legal aid organizations. He has a standing offer to basically buy you lunch if you're taking a pro bono case or coffee or whatever, and you can ask him whatever you need to ask about pro bono or about bankruptcy. He's an expert. He does a lot of training for the legal aid program, but he also mentors a lot of lawyers who are taking their first bankruptcy case, and just having those kinds of resources and knowing who to connect people with beyond myself, just who can provide that expertise. We have another program that just in the immigration area that just, we were able to recruit 160 lawyers to work on asylum applications for Afghans in Wisconsin. The Catholic Charities organization here that's leading that effort, they have put together the training programs, manuals, but also videos for the volunteers. But then the immigration bar, they have lawyers identified who are going to be the mentors for the volunteers, most of whom, I'd say 90% of whom, have never done an asylum petition before. So that's going to be really critical for them, for the volunteers.
I'll just jump in. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. I was
just
please
continue about mentorship.
Exactly.
Oh, no, I don't have anything to add about mentorship. I was just going to, so if you have more to say.
I was just going to suggest, we didn't do that, but recruiting mentors along with your volunteers, make that part of the volunteer.
Yeah, no, I was just going to jump in to say that, because of the nature of our pro bono clinics, that really that I think what we focus on for retentions is just ensuring that it's like a consistent supportive experience. So, it's a little bit different because it's encapsulated, but ensuring that we have sufficient training available if people don't have the background. So training available, supervising attorneys, all of the work is always reviewed at the end of the clinic. People are available for questions throughout. And then just specifically, like we create, kind of like step-by-step, like clinic flow days, step-by-step guides, like what to expect, because these are all very sort of routine things, providing samples, annotated guides, whatever possible. And we put it for volunteers, we consolidate it. So we make, on one web page, like here's everything that you need to be prepared for the day of, to have available, along with just the individual support. Both, we partner with other organizations and sometimes with private attorneys who provide the substantive support. So identifying very clearly, you will be supported throughout the day. Here are the people available who can provide you that support. And then just our communication, like our staff's communication with the volunteers as well throughout.
I want to pull back to something Amy said in the beginning about the benefit of having kind of repeat volunteers, because that's really beneficial, right, for the organizations as well, and for volunteers to really feel like they're connecting with the pro bono projects. But also what Jeff said, as far as like remembering also to recruit mentors and all of that. So I've had really, really great success as far as pro bono attorneys who I've recruited to take on immigration cases, who I've mentored and taught about immigration, but where their specific area of practice and expertise actually comes around to help with other pro bono work. So to give an example, a lot of cases I place are special immigrant juvenile status cases. And so that's a very specific area of immigration law, because you actually have a state court component where you need to go to a state juvenile court. So it's been really great to where I can, certain pro bono partners who have been working with us for a while and have learned about special immigrant juvenile status, I can then reach out to them in the future on certain cases and say, hey, you practice in this specific area of Florida. We're filing the state court portion of this special immigrant juvenile case. This judge. Are you familiar with what they prefer at that specific court? So that's been really helpful, right? And a way that they can do pro bono work in their own expertise area.
So there's a question that I'm going to get to in just a second, because it actually goes to one of the things we're going to discuss. But I wanted to talk for a second about some of the training supports that you have. And Amy, I know that Miguel, whenever we talked to him, he talked a little bit about some of your the training portal that you all have. Can you talk at all about that?
Sure. So One Justice is a partner in the Pro Bono Training Institute, which is an online platform offering it's modules like bite-sized trainings available for pro bono attorneys and other volunteers. There's also interpreters, videos for interpreters to participate in as well. So One Justice and the Legal Aid Foundation of Los Angeles partner in the Pro Bono Training Institute. All of the trainings are completely free. You just have to create an account, but you can watch them for free. And pro bono attorneys can also receive MCLE credit for them. And they're interactive. You can take quizzes. It's hopefully, and they're short, or they're broken down into short pieces. And so the hope is They employ, we employ adult learning best practices so that people can take these short modules and hopefully really learn, focus, take the quizzes, and be better prepared for their pro bono experience.
So how often do you all follow up and check in with volunteers so that they feel supported and so that you also are ensuring that the cases are being handled appropriately?
I think it's hard to put a steadfast rule, but I do try to at least have some sort of contact every 3 months. A lot of times it's just kind of a, how are things going? Just checking in. Sometimes the wheels of immigration can move really slow, so there aren't really any changes, but just something so I can kind of stay on the radar. And on the back side of it, I feel like as a pro bono coordinator, there's always kind of all these thoughts going on in your mind as far as how much, what's that balance and comfort level with the reaching out and checking in. Some of the thoughts that I have going through my mind are, is the client opening up to their pro bono attorney? Will the, pro bono attorney and the client connect with each other? Is the pro bono attorney going to regularly check in? Is the client going to understand the need to keep their pro bono attorney updated on things like, even like the change of address or anything like that? So it's constantly this, how involved should I be balance? Another thing I keep in mind is making sure that I'm checking in and being supportive, but also not inhibiting the pro bono attorney's ability to build rapport with their client. I try to do or send out updates in the law and policy. So even though it's not like a direct, hey, what's going on with your case check-in, at least they're able to see like an email coming in from me and my name, kind of as a reminder, right? Because I can say, hey, this just happened. This could impact your cases. Please reach out to me if you have any questions or if you don't understand how this might impact your case. So it's definitely a balance, right?
Any other tips from Jeff or Amy on check-ins and communication with your volunteer attorneys?
I think just, either whether you're connecting with them individually to ask for an update, or you're just connecting with the group to just, a morale booster if it's a bigger project. I think that's an important thing to do. You want to know where things stand with the case or with the project. How are things going? Is there anything more that they need from you? And sometimes that I don't have templates for that. It's more customized to what do I think they might need at the moment, they might need to hear, or just reminding them that I'm here or that someone else is available to help.
Yeah, and I don't think I have anything to speak to I can't really speak to sort of the longer term check-ins and updates. I will just say for like the short term, we're pretty intense about our messaging and keeping in contact with our volunteers, because it's really critical, I think, to figure out, like, are people finding the resources? Are they doing the trainings? Are they actually prepared? Are they going to show up the day of? Is more of our focus. So, I think really making sure when we're communicating, making sure that we're sharing everything, that it's very clear, and then sometimes asking for people to check back in with us. Either like we have both like a form that we ask people to fill out in the beginning, and then they have to, say, I agree to do all these things, but also sometimes like a midpoint check-in, and just reminding people too, I think for legal clinics, like, okay, you will be helping somebody directly. It's really important that, especially in this pandemic and virtual world, it's very important that you let us know immediately if something is going on with you, because we need to be able to plan. And the person that you will be helping is directly affected if, you don't do your training or you don't show up.
So we had a question about any tips for when pro bono attorneys don't check in as often or want to give the case back despite having a signed agreement. Any tips on how to deal with that situation?
it's hard to say, like, look back and what I would have done, but I do always like to kind of highlight that in the initial placement of cases, I always make it a point to not only kind of highlight all the, like, attractive things about the case or what it is and why this person needs help so much, but I do also highlight sort of any of the issues or obstacles that I foresee in the case, because I think that once again kind of further supports the partner trusting you and seeing that, you're not just trying to place cases in high volume, you're actually taking into account what's going on with the case. But it does help in avoiding, right, those future situations of, like, it's the week of the trial and suddenly the pro bono attorneys want to give back the case and things of that nature. I also think that it's also important, that's why, especially when you're dealing with law firms and working with law firms, to make sure that you do have kind of a senior higher up pro bono contact at the firm identified, right? Because oftentimes those sorts of issues can be related to the associate attorney being under a lot of pressure, having a lot of deliverables as to their actual, like, job, right? And maybe being out of pro bono hours. So some firms will allot 50 hours that are billable towards pro bono, and then once the attorneys kind of run through those, it may be harder for them to put time towards that. So I think it's really important just to make sure that things are also cleared with firms, so that support is there in the pro bono case, and that limits situations of things coming back.
Jeff or Amy, anything to add on that?
No, that's thankfully not something I've encountered, but I I can imagine that it would be a moment of stress, both for the person who's saying that they need to give something back and for the program that may need to find a new volunteer. And I think, yeah, just clear communication, frequent enough communication so that you're not surprised at a critical juncture is I think I agree, that's the most important thing.
I mean, just jumping in quickly, and this is not in my current job, but in my past experience, I think, just echoing, I think, what Angela has shared so far, but just being really upfront about what the expectations are, and, identifying, and I think especially it is also really helpful when there's a point of contact at, like, the firm that you can bring into that conversation. If there's not, I think also just at least trying to navigate through the conversation, like making it clear, like, this was your obligation, and seeing, like, well, if you can't do this, who are you going to bring in? Like, kind of creating the conversation to turn it back. That doesn't always work well, but hopefully making it clear that this was their obligation and their responsibility, and how can we work together if you really can't do it? How can we problem solve together to ensure that the client has the help that they need?
I think it's important also to have pro bono policies in place that you send to pro bono attorneys in advance for them to sign off before you share any sort of pro bono client information. I think that's been a good way for me to identify from the start whether or not a relationship may or may not work, right? Because if it's gotten to the point where I can't get back this signed document that lays out all the responsibilities of not just the pro bono attorney, but of the organization that's placing the case and of the client, right? And making sure that the client's doing everything they need to do to help their attorney help them. That says a lot to me about whether or not I'm going to be getting follow-up on when I check in, or whether or not there's going to be movement on the case. So I think having pro bono policies that are tailored exactly to the scope of work that and what pro bono work your organization is placing is really important. And again, making sure that that's something that's signed and returned. So mine specifically have that in place to where I will not give the client's contact information or identifying information until I receive those pro bono policies back signed. And with that, that's also a good opportunity to have, your confidentiality agreement so that they understand, a social media disclaimer as well. That way you're making sure that the client is protected.
So we have some questions pop up, and I'm going to go through a few of them. Any recommendations or best practices for collecting volunteer hours at the end of the year?
I've used Google Form, emails, SurveyMonkey, all of the above to collect that kind of information. And then I've gotten, when I've done pro bono matters, I've gotten an email or a letter at the conclusion asking me to report or estimate the number of hours spent. So I send that back to the organization.
How many pro bono attorneys do you each manage at one time, and what do you think is a good number for best practices?
Well, I have a different perspective because I'm at a bar association, so we're not a direct client service organization. So I can have huge numbers of lawyers because I have indirect contact with so many of them. I also manage on behalf of our Access to Justice Commission, I also manage our ABA Free Legal Answers portal. So that's hundreds of volunteers, though, but automation helps with a lot of that. There was an automation question in the chat. So automated tools that make it easier for you to screen and approve volunteers, things that make your life easier as a volunteer manager. There are a lot of options out there that you can, some of them which are off the shelf, some of which you can customize yourself if you're comfortable with working with different online tools. I'll have to leave it to my co-panelists as to how many volunteers it's a bit like how many cases can you handle as an attorney, and that's different for every person.
Yeah, I think this maybe have to be Angela's answer because similarly, we're not a direct services organization, and I think we work on, like, the clinics are a very specific sort of animal. So I don't think there's any limitations, and there's a lot of, as Jeff said, there's a lot of technology out there. There's a lot of technology out there that you can help to sort of offset. And I think it's just, as a nonprofit, like, how much can you invest, or what are you using sort of like I'll be honest, like, sometimes we use we work with a lot of different partners, so it all depends on like who can use what and like what free things are out there. And so sometimes it's a little bit of like a Frankenstein of like different technology. And that could differ if you have unlimited resources. I'm sure there's probably like great technology that could do everything for you. And you could really scale up, but it sort of depends on like what your resources are.
I would say that I wouldn't look at it from a number of cases perspective because, as my co-panelists have shown, it kind of depends on the scope of the work, and you can be really successful and not have any sort of ethical issues or anything, having tons of volunteers, right? They're doing excellent work, working with large groups. I think for me, I never at one set time have the same number of volunteers because I really have to make an assessment of the kinds of cases that are on my pro bono list for placement, right? So if I have a release request case, that's going to be way smaller of a scope of pro bono in the sense of like, here's the deportation officer, here's the client's information, here's a sample of what your request is going to look like, submit that to the officer, right? Versus a defensive asylum case that's set for trial. I mean, that's a huge, and if you look at it from the picture of that's one case and one case, a release request case is going to be minuscule as far as the work and time in comparison to that defensive asylum. A tip that I could share is I know some organizations have put into a place like a point system. So I think that's also an individualized assessment that you need to make within your office and what kinds of cases you're trying to place, right? But maybe, an asylum claim would get a higher amount of points than, that release request case would get. And that way you can kind of figure out what's your comfortable points number to be at. But I think, how many cases is a tough question.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and move us on to our next topic because we only have about 10 minutes left. So let's talk a little bit about recognition. How do you determine the types of recognition that is motivating for your attorneys, and what are some of the methods that you find most effective? I guess we'll start with Angela.
So the first thing that comes to mind, right, is that it's hard to generalize, but at the end of the day, we're all human, right? And so at a minimum, you need to say thank you to people. And I've heard this, before in talking to different partners where they've had a bad experience at some point where they just didn't have somebody say thank you. It's something that is free of cost. I think there's a lot of debate now as far as, the email thank yous versus sending, thank you actual cards. And that can be really nice, but then you have a lot of people who aren't physically in an office anymore. But I think the big takeaway from that is, in some capacity, make sure you're saying thank you, because we're all human, and that is just something we all appreciate, right? Something I've also found a lot of success in is nominating attorneys for different awards. And that's really great, right? Because there's no cost associated with that. It's normally, and even if the attorney doesn't win, right, you're still showing the attorney you're grateful and you want to highlight them for the work they've done. So I'll reach out. I personally like to reach out to the attorney just to let them know I'm interested in nominating them for a specific award. That way, for whatever reason, if they're not comfortable with that, but also to like ask for, information and putting together the, the award. And social media, I think is huge. Anything that you can do to kind of tie your organization to, like, if they're at a firm or something, putting a shout out to congratulations to, this attorney for working on, the Y case. The results of that helped, the child be able to achieve stability and being one step closer to getting their residency, things like that, tagging their name, tagging the firm. That I think has received really great response from the volunteers and getting that outward public recognition.
Yeah, it's really important to say thank you, just as she said, as part of being human and good human interaction. It's also thinking about it from the, it's particularly if you're dealing with someone in a private firm, and if they're not a partner, the accolades that you can shower on the person who, particularly if they're doing good work, can help them in their career, can help them within their firm. So the information that you send to the public, but also to the firm as a whole, saying that we've had great service from this particular lawyer to help this client, is both meaningful for the firm and meaningful for the individual lawyer. And I think anything you can do to make people feel good about what they've done because they've just devoted a chunk of their day or their life to this. So it does make a difference. You may say, I just did it for to give back, but it always feels good to have someone say thanks and recognize you in some way.
Yeah, I mean, I have to agree and echo. I think acknowledging and thanking people for their contribution is really critical. I think the way that we've been thinking about motivation is sometimes it can be mission driven, can be awards driven, and it can be socially driven. I mean, sometimes we work with a lot of groups of volunteers. So I think just thinking about different, and it's those aren't like three separate columns, right? Like they're all interconnected. So just thinking about like what are the motivations that volunteers might have, and what are the opportunities to sort of acknowledge and lift up the meaningful contributions that people are making, whether it's through social media, whether through newsletters or, your organization's awards. After every clinic, we always, to the group of volunteers, and then we also usually copy in the pro bono coordinators, but we send out a report after each event to say like, how many people were helped, and especially if we have anything outcome related, we always include that. And mission related. It's just an opportunity, I think, to sort of reinforce like why people were volunteering in the first place. And then for everything too, we collect, we evaluate, so we survey our clients, obviously, to ensure, check with them to see how things were. We also survey our volunteers, and then we usually do debriefs with our partners and just like our own staff. And a lot of times just individually, I'll reach out to volunteers afterwards, especially, particularly obviously if a client has something really specific and wonderful to say, like we will usually share, like the quote that someone said directly about them. But also just even, like our own staff or a supervising attorney, if somebody was really wonderful to work with, like really, just like acknowledging that and being really specific about what somebody did, that was good.
And this goes back to something that Angela started with, the kind of knowing your audience, what motivates them. And Amy just mentioned it too. Is just does the firm have a marketing department that's really gung ho to promote what they're doing? If so, you've got a built-in partner for not just thanking the individual attorneys, but thanking the firm and making the firm more likely to say yes to your next request. You could put out a press release if the attorneys have achieved a particularly good result on something, or if it's not an individual matter, but you had a single firm, for example, that maybe staffed a clinic, and it's a area of your state that is a smaller media market. You can get press releases covered much more easily than you can in a more urban area. Articles, we've done articles by and about the volunteers in a particular project, just to give them a chance to either in their own words talk about what it meant to them, profiling them in our magazine just for their overall volunteer efforts, to basically hold them up as an example to create that culture of pro bono, or support a culture of pro bono. Holding up volunteers with spotlights either on your website or your newsletter is a good practice.
Just an additional thought also for those who are maybe like in the process of building their programs and kind of trying to figure out, when should I be doing all this? I think sometimes it's kind of hard to say, okay, when do I send these messages or do these highlights? Obviously the idea should be that it should be something ongoing, but I do think it's important to also keep in mind, like a pro bono week in October. I think it's a good time also for those of us who are, pro bono coordinators to remind ourselves to be doing these things and saying thank you. So, now we're in mid-July. I definitely suggest those of you who are running pro bono programs, start thinking about what can you do, in the time being, but also come October. At least there it gives you something some sort of a date, some sort of a deadline, something to remind yourself that we need to be thanking all the great pro bono partners we have.
I'll just add too, and this is maybe more, sometimes can bring in like the development perspective, but we've also, like Pro Bono Week is a good opportunity, but we've also sometimes used unconventional or like more, there's other creative things. I think we've thanked people on Valentine's Day or, just like as we're going into the holidays or like the end of the year, like, thank you for what you did this past year. Especially too, like if our organization has like a whole impact report, but like sometimes we'll just connect individually with organizations or with law firms or law schools that have provided with a great deal of volunteers and connect directly with them. And so it doesn't always have to be in Pro Bono Week because, firms that do a lot of pro bono may be getting a lot of things. So there's opportunities to be creative, I think.
Yeah, and just a reminder for everyone, Pro Bono Week is this year, October 23rd to 29th, although we do track things that happen throughout the whole month, because I know some states now are even doing, whole months of activities. So if you have any questions about that, you can certainly get in touch with me. one question, because we only have a couple minutes left. We only have like 2 minutes left. One person asked in the chat, do you give your volunteers the option to choose their scope of representation, or do you indicate the scope based on the client needs?
Yeah, to me, scope ought to be also already clear at the moment that you're pitching the opportunity. Maybe it's somewhat negotiable if it's okay with the client and if it's in the client's best interests, but the scope of what the representation is going to be ordinarily should be clear at the outset.
Okay, with that, it is 1 o'clock, well, 1 o'clock my time. So we are going to go ahead and end for today. And I just want to thank our panelists for joining us and sharing all of your wisdom and knowledge with everyone. And I will be collecting some sample policies. So I will send out that, and I will also send out, I send in the chat, the CELA guide. Unfortunately, their website is down, so we were unable to share that in the chat. If you do have any questions, certainly feel free to email me, and I can get in touch with our 3 panelists if you have any other questions that come up from the webinar. And with that, I will just say thank you to everyone for joining us, and take care.